Hi, everyone. Hopefully everybody's doing well today. Thank you so much for joining us as part of our distance learning support series from the Instruction and Professional Development of CTA. My name is Norma Sanchez. I am the manager of the Instruction and Professional Development Department. You guys are in quite a treat today. You will hear from, this session is going to be a little different than our webinars. We are going to have a panel discussion with 4 amazing educators to talk about an authentic collaboration in a time of distance learning. But first, I'm going to go over just a very brief few slides of introduction, and then we're going to get started on our session. So this is part of our distance learning support series for CTA. We have been doing webinars all of last week, and now we have this week, and all of our sessions are at 3:30 to 4:30. Our sessions revolve around 4 themes based on the needs of educators. We went around listening to educators in terms of what they needed for distance learning support. And they're grouped around these 4 themes. 1 is rich content and effective pedagogy. 2 is culture, engagement, and social emotional learning. 3 is system support and improvement. And 4 is equity, access, agency, and advocacy. And today's session is around system support and improvement. And that's why you see the green on the slides of these sessions. Before we start, we also have been advocating for one piece in all of our sessions. And if you're not familiar, or if you are, that's fantastic. But in our support and advocacy for our schools, there is an initiative that will be on our November ballot that we wanted you to be aware of. It's the Schools and Communities First campaign, and it's Proposition 15. It's an opportunity to increase funding that we desperately need for our schools in California. So please read through the initiative, and hopefully we can count on your vote as a yes on Prop 15. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Ann Jaquith, whom is the Executive Director of the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy and Education, and she's going to be our facilitator for this session. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I will be reading those and informing our wonderful session presenters on them so they can answer your questions. So enjoy your session, everybody.
Thank you, Norma, and welcome, everyone. We are really excited to be here with you. And I thought before we begin, I'd just tell you a little bit about how we're going to run this session. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, who are all colleagues at Suva Intermediate Middle School in Montebello, to introduce themselves. And then I have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask them to respond to that have to do with how they've created an opportunity for authentic collaboration at their school this spring. And we'll talk for about 30 minutes or so and hear from them. And then I'd like to open it up for questions from all of you. So in the meantime, as they're talking, if you have questions or responses, please feel free to type them into the chat. So let's introduce our panelists to you. Why don't we begin with Michelle? Could you introduce yourself by stating your role and how long you've been a teacher and how long you've been at Suva?
Hi, I'm Michelle Fuentes. I've been at Suva. I'm going to be starting my 3rd year. So 3rd year teaching and 3rd year at Suva as well. And I teach language arts and social studies.
Thank you. Could we hear from Myra now?
Hi, everybody. I'm Myra Paskier. I'm an 8th grade science teacher. This is going to be my 21st year at Suva Intermediate. It's actually the one school that I've been spent the most time in. I was at another school for only 1 year, but kept coming back.
Thank you. Javier.
Hi, everyone. My name is Javier Hernandez. This is my 21st year teaching as well. I've been at Suva Intermediate for about 7 years now, teaching language arts, social studies, and AVID.
Thank you. And last but not least, Larry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Larry McKiernan. This is my 25th year in education. I did 20 years in the classroom teaching 3rd and 4th grade, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I've been at SUVA for the last 8 years, and the last 3 years out of the classroom. And this past year, I was an assistant principal.
Thanks, Larry. So, panelists, you all had an interesting experience this spring. In this very strange and bizarre time when we were learning at a distance and virtually, you all created some opportunities to collaborate in some really authentic ways. And so I'm wondering if you could each respond to how working at a distance has affected opportunities for professional collaboration with your colleagues at SUVA. And who would like to start?
Okay, I think I can begin.
Okay, great, Myra.
So just to give you a little bit of background on SUVA Intermediate, we're a very close staff, and so we have always collaborated very well together. And so I don't want to say that the transition to collaboration, during distance learning was easy, but it made it easier to transition into what we eventually became, which was this, cluster of, collaborating teams based on our content areas. So we went from collaboration as a whole staff to now working, let's say, as departments and by grade level. So that's what it turned out into. And so it became more of an intimate collaboration where it allowed for more, I guess, just closeness and opening of, just being, very vulnerable to what we were experiencing. So that was my experience during that time.
And Myra, maybe just also by way of background, could you just describe what the structure of the collaboration was? Because I know for some teachers in schools, they actually felt more isolated during this time, whereas at SUVA, you actually felt more connected. So what was the structure?
So as I want to say maybe 2 or 3 weeks into, distance learning, after we kind of figured out the whole craziness of getting our kids into our classroom and so on, Larry decided that we were going to actually start meeting as department team members. And so each team was assigned a specific grade, a specific time during the week. So for example, my team, which was the 7th and 8th grade science team, would meet on a Thursday at 1 o'clock. And that was like for 1 hour during the week. That was the time when we came together, and it was my 7th grade science peer and myself, Larry as our assistant principal, our principal, and also our TOSA. So during that time, we would bring up any concerns that we had, and we would discuss, if we had similar concerns, similar issues, and how, or if we needed help. It was kind of like okay, I don't know how to fix it. Can you guys give me some pointers, and so on. So that was kind of the extent. But we had a set time and at a set place, and we knew that at that time we had to meet with our team, and it was like a welcome time to just really just say, okay, this is our planning time. This is our, problem solving time. Even this is our venting time also.
Great, thanks. Michelle, you want to add in what your experience was like?
Yeah, I agree with Myra that I think we've always been, or for the 3 years that I've been there, I've always felt that collaboration and teamwork was one of our strengths. But during distance learning, I feel like it was strengthened even more because we were so secluded. We didn't have to worry about, being in the lounge or wherever with the whole staff. It was just, us and our team members, and then admin, and we were able to really talk about, okay, what we needed help with, what was working well. And I think for me, Being a beginning teacher, it did make me feel more comfortable because I wasn't talking to the whole staff. I was just talking to the people that I normally work with anyways. So it was a sense of just closeness and community. So it really helped me.
Great. Javier, you want to share yours?
Yes, absolutely. I just would like to elaborate in terms of our structure prior to counseling, the face-to-face instruction. And so structurally, on Mondays, we had the opportunities to meet with our teams and collaborate beforehand. And so, as Michelle mentioned, that has been a strength for our staff for many years. And part of that has been led by Larry. And so now when we went to meeting online, the structure was already there. We already have our team, and we have this expectation that we're meeting and we're discussing things that we can do to improve student learning. And so when we moved to distance learning, the focus was there again, and that focus is what are some of the challenges, successes and challenges that we're facing, and what can we do as a team to try to address the challenges.
That's great. Larry, do you want to share a little bit about what was in your mind in the early stages, early days?
So yeah, so I part of it was that I was reaching out to a lot of teachers, or a lot of teachers also reaching out to me, and we were all trying to solve problems disparately, right? And one of the things that we do at SUVA, as everybody's mentioned, is that we collaborate, we problem solve together, we try to learn from each other constantly. So by the end of the first week, like on a Thursday, I just contacted my principal. I said, why don't we just set up a structure where we just support teachers collaborating? We just kind of made it. And so I reached out to everybody and said, hey, would this be a good time for you? We want to do one at 11, want to do one at 1. And so we met as somebody out of the classroom. We met 8 times a week, Monday through Thursday, just with teachers, and very much in this manner where it was come in, how can we help you? And it really was, how can you help each other? And that was really what it was about. It was, so there's some things that you're having difficulties with that, they're not necessarily connected to instruction. They're connected to reaching out to students. Well, let's help you take care of that. And we'll make sure that we can do that so that you can focus on what we do, and which is help our students learn. And then in the process, learn together. Like we had I think a wide array of experiences with online learning. Some people would already using Google Classrooms, and others who this was brand new to them. And so using that structure so that people could learn from each other, I thought it was really beautiful to watch how people really were vulnerable, as it's been mentioned, and also stepped up and supported one another. And it was very much kind of like, so what are the difficulties you're experiencing? What are the obstacles you're experiencing? Oh, how about successes? And it was just very much, it went from there. And so people would express their difficulties or obstacles, and they're like, yeah, I'm experiencing the same obstacle. How can we help you with that? And, oh, I found this other learning app. And so it really became a space for learning together, for really like this collective spirit of learning together, which was, I learned a ton during this time. And I agree, one of the other pieces was, I feel, which is odd, that we got closer in many ways. Like these meetings were fun, so it wasn't like, oh, at least for me, it wasn't like I'm there 8 times, I was like, hey, I'm going to meet again with this other great group of colleagues who are doing amazing work and really working really hard to reach students in different ways.
So Larry, I think it's really interesting that you said that you learned a ton from listening in and participating in these meetings. And I'm curious if there's something in particular, an example of something that you learned. And then the question that I'm going to ask Michelle and Javier and Myra to follow up on is, I'm curious about what are some of the kinds of strategies or structures that really supported you to learn or to try out new things in your classrooms when everything was so new? Like, how did this collaboration work? Because I think for people who are listening to the webinar, trying to understand, what was it about the way it was structured that helped you to learn and grow? So for you, Larry, you were meeting with these teams before. What were something new that you learned in this online collaboration?
So I think one of the things that we know, educators are constantly innovating, right? And this was a space of innovation on steroids, essentially, right? So they were people were looking for different learning portals that were helpful. And so I was learning about all these different portals through all 8 meetings. And what I was doing a lot of is like, oh, I see what you're struggling with a little bit. Have you heard of this learning portal? Okay, so one that came up was, and we're not endorsing anyone, was Actively Learn. That worked really nice. Michelle introduced one called Vocabulary. Oh, that's a great one. And a few people had tried it, maybe 1 or 2 teachers. By the end, most teachers were trying it because they were working on it together. So what I learned was it was kind of validating that we know that we constantly innovate. But as I said, we were innovating in a totally different manner, and we're very much open to new ideas and vulnerable to say, I'm having difficulty engaging kids. What has been an app that's really engaging?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
And I think in like the whole, we were all vulnerable. It also created, in a way, and as crazy as it sounds, a low stress situation where it's like, okay, let's try something. And if it doesn't work, okay, well, we'll move on and we'll try to find something else. So it wasn't like we were held to any specific platform that we had to use. It was, let's try it out for a couple of weeks. If we like it, then we can keep it. And if we don't, then okay, we'll try to find something else that works for us. So I think that was helpful too, knowing that we weren't held to anything in particular.
Yeah, and Michelle, I'm wondering, were you guys invited to bring how your tryout went to the conversation, to the meetings? Were you invited to sort of share what you did, how it went? I mean, was that the focus of the conversation?
Yeah, it was. So Larry has a whole PDSA tracker where we would talk, okay, what were our successes? What were our challenges? And we were able to share and see, okay, if something didn't work for one teacher and it worked for another, maybe what were the reasons behind that and how can we adapt so that it works for everybody?
That's great.
So in addition to that, just to add to that, so we were collecting data along the way in different forms, not necessarily quantitative data. Just, how it would work for us as teachers. There are certain platforms that didn't work for everybody. So one thing that made it easy, well, I don't want to say easy, I would say more open, and like Michelle said, low stress, was that it didn't feel like we were having a staff meeting. It just really felt like we were just talking to like people who were going through a very similar situation in a time where everyone was stressed out about what was happening. Hearing that other people were struggling with similar things was kind of like it really lowered our anxiety. Like it made me feel, okay, it's not just me. And so it provided us with ways of dealing with it. And so in a time when we felt isolated from the world because we were teaching from home with different situations, this 1 hour that we would meet with our group and we were talking about how our kids were working, or if we had similar students who were struggling, and we put our heads together to try to come up with ways of helping them. We were helping ourselves to feel connected to each other, and so it continued that that sense of connection that we have with our school, with our staff members. So from the social emotional level, for teachers, it was just like a sense of sanity for us. It just kept going, and it just added to our, all right, at least for this 1 hour, things are as they were when we were in school.
So that sounds like that's really important, right? Because I was teaching online this spring too, and it was, we were juggling so many things, right? It was kind of exhausting. So it sounds like to have this hour each week that was refreshing and sort of refueling for you was probably really helpful.
Yeah, I never thought you would look forward to a staff meeting so much. It's just one of those things where you're like, it's just, I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to see if they were going through the same thing. And many times, I don't want to say that it turned into a venting session, but it was more like, it's like the validation of it, what you're going through. It's legitimate. It's what most of us are going through at this time because we've never gone through it before.
Yeah.
So, the whole idea of like, we're in this together, it really turned out to be that, yes, we were experiencing similar, things as we were going through distance learning for the very first time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Javier?
the one thing that I would add is this idea that this was organic, and so that we were sharing the experiences that we were facing, and so it wasn't like Larry or our principal was dictating to us, these are the things you need to complete, or these are the things you should accomplish within these meetings, but rather we were sharing our experiences, our successes, our challenges, and Larry was there to facilitate and guide the conversation and offer ideas, but it all was based on what we thought was important at that time. And so when we met, it was based on our needs and not anyone else's, but rather that team and what they were dealing with or faced with.
So that's actually a really powerful notion, isn't it? That it was what you all were bringing to the table, and you were sort of setting the agenda and driving the conversation and supporting one another. And then it also sounds like that Larry was able to bring ideas that he was hearing from other teams into yours. So he was sort of able to act as a broker of ideas, if you will, across the school, which is pretty powerful. I'm wondering if there are, I want to, for the folks who are listening, if there are particular questions that you have that you'd like to hear the panelists address, I want to encourage you to put those into the chat.
And there's one question that came up, and it's somebody said this sounds very similar to a PLC, a professional learning community. Maybe you want to address how maybe it was or was different?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I don't know if any of the panelists would like to respond to that first.
It was in a form, a professional learning community, because we would have a specific goal, we would set an objective, and we would follow through, and then we would collect data and report back. So there's a specific cycle that went along with it, and Larry will probably add more to the PDSA cycle. And so it was a way of develop as professionals and support each other as professionals. So in a way, yes, it was a form of a PLC.
Larry, do you want to talk about that? Oh, go ahead, Javier.
It's very similar to the professional learning community aspect. The one big difference that I notice with the PDSA cycle is that the window is much smaller. And so you're gathering data more often, and so therefore you're making adjustments to your instruction within a week or 2 weeks, so that you're not waiting a longer period of time. When I remember the professional learning community cycle, that took 6 weeks. And so this is a much shorter window, and you're constantly gathering data, and again, to make adjustments to your instruction. And within this structure particularly, definitely we would try something, and the next week we would discuss, okay, these are the things that went well, these are the things that we should modify, or perhaps not even continue because it's not working with our students.
Yeah, and what I would add to what Javier said is that professional learning communities or those cycles, there's no sort of right or wrong length of time. And I know what I found in my own research is that the closer, the narrower the time frame, as Javier just described, the more successful these tend to be, because you're able to iterate and to adapt and to make adjustments more quickly based on the real-time evidence of what's happening in the classroom with students. And so that's during a distance learning kind of environment or not, either way. Larry, would you like to share some more about the PDSA cycle and how that's informed your work?
Sure. I would say that probably people at my school are like, he just can't stop talking about PDSAs. So it's something that it's a very simple process. When I started learning about it, it was very very intuitive to say, okay, this is kind of what we do. We just plan what we're going to do it, then we do it, then we just kind of study it. And the study is what is our data source. And as Myra said, sometimes it was quantitative, sometimes it was qualitative, and the A is act upon it. And really, it's like, what did our data tell us? Cool. Do we continue with it? Do we abandon it? Do we modify it? What do we need to do? And it's very quick. So the way you spoke of it is kind of this very quick iterative process is exactly what it is. And so you can go through a PDSA cycle, sure, in 3 or 4 weeks, but it's ideal if it goes through 1 week and you just find the data, it worked really well, move on. So I just think, I think that's what was powerful about it, that it was quick, it was easy. And a lot of our growth came from looking at data saying, okay, our greatest source of data is our students, right? What are our students telling us? There were some of our learning portals that we've been using that we thought were effective that kids were just not interacting with. They're not engaging. And so immediately, instead of saying, well, how do we make this one more effective? It was like, well, why don't we just not emphasize that? And maybe there were some other ones that are more engaging. And so I think really looking at how students were engaging with all these different portals was one of the ways we learned together. So I think that's also what made this successful, that we saw growth in very immediate, direct ways, week by week.
Yeah, that's a great example of dropping a portal that the kids weren't feeling attracted to. So that's an example of evidence-based practice. There's a couple of questions that some of the participants have asked about. One of them, one person was asking about how did your specialist teachers, either the special education teachers or other specialist teachers in your school, participate in these conversations? Did they at all? Could one of you talk about that and how that was helpful?
So I'll jump in on this one. So specifically for our SDC team, and
say
SDC,
what what that team is.
Special day class, mild moderate setting. For a special day class, mild moderate setting, and for our emotionally disturbed setting, they have their own PDSA team. So we met with them, and then for our RSP teachers, they actually jumped in on a lot of meetings so that they would also be able to see different ways to support students. So everybody jumped on. Our counselors also jumped onto a lot of the sessions to see how they could support their learning, trying to see any students that needed any kind of mental health referrals or just students that we needed to reach out a little bit more that we noticed were struggling or having a little bit of anxiety. We did have students with COVID. We did have families with COVID. So reaching out to them, and these things came up during meetings. So it was the learning side, but as Myra said a few times, it was also the SEL side that mattered. So everybody jumped on. SDC, ED had their own team, and then RSP was on everybody's team.
That's great. And then when you said they jumped on, was there a special invitation that they were given? How could like Myra invite one of them to join? Did they just come in when they wanted to? Sort of how'd they know? Those teachers, right, have to attend to all of the kids in a school, so they couldn't be on every meeting, I'm assuming. So I'm just wondering how that worked.
So we just asked them to meet. So for RSP, we asked them to meet with the team that they worked with the most, right? So we had 2 different RSP teachers, one who worked with sixth grade and one who works with 7th and 8th grade. So we asked them to attend those meetings. And it was, if it was getting overwhelming, we said, that's okay, move back. And the counselors, we just invited them to every meeting without an expectation that they would attend every meeting, but they were always invited just in case. And interestingly, they attended almost all meetings. They just chose.
Okay, so they must have, people usually vote with their feet. So if they weren't expected, but they chose to attend, that's probably a sign that they found them useful too. Great. There's another question from someone who's listening to you all talk. And this person asks, I appreciate the perspective of collaboration among teachers being less intimidating. And this person's wondering how the less intimidating atmosphere was achieved. I think Michelle had said that it was not so intimidating to share and to try out new things. And I'm just wondering, but Myra, go ahead if you've got a response.
That's okay. Michelle could go. I can add to it.
Well, really, I don't know how it's been achieved because I still feel, I'm newer, but I know that from the minute I started at SUBA, even before I would sub, I've always felt welcomed, and it was just, teachers asking if I needed anything or if I needed help. I just always felt like I had somebody at all times to ask for help if I needed it. And they're just really welcoming and friendly. I don't know how it was achieved because I am new, but I do appreciate it. I just know everybody's welcoming. I don't know, Myra, Javier, I don't know. You guys have been there longer.
I mean, being at SUVA since actually I started teaching, I think that has been I think that's just the culture of our school. We are a very welcoming staff, and regardless of the changes in administration or in our, teachers and so on, we always tend to just kind of open everybody with welcome arms, and it's just a natural thing that we do at SUVA. And I don't know if we must work at it because it continues to happen, but it's just part of who we are. I think that's what's going on. And the fact that we were doing this during our regular meetings on Mondays, it was just a natural, like Javier said, it was a natural transition to distance learning meetings, on a smaller scale with just our groups, our content specific groups.
I'm wondering, go ahead, Javier.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is definitely, there was a history of collaboration, and so you're building off of that experience. But the other piece is that we are in the midst of a pandemic, right? And so we were in such a context where we were open to being vulnerable. And so one example is a teacher who is sharing that they're having a hard time addressing the fact that some of their students are not showing up to the Google Meets. And so he's figuring out a way to, how do I get them to engage? How do I get them to participate? So that's one aspect of, as a professional, I want my students to learn. But then the other side of it was, well, how do I know that I'm not just being this teacher that's being unreasonable about the fact that maybe my students are not able to connect, or maybe my students are watching their siblings when they're supposed to be joining our Google Meet. And so just being very honest about this conflicting experience. Yes, I'm a professional teacher, but I'm also considering the humanity of my students and what they're experiencing during this pandemic. And so that, to me, and the fact that we're willing to listen to that and provide support, that creates that type of culture that I'm not going to judge you based on your experience, and I'm here to support you as much as I can. And perhaps just listening is one way to support you as well. And so that, to me, was a good way to remember that we were very vulnerable and willing to share exactly what we were experiencing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And as I was listening to Michelle and Myra too, I was thinking that beyond welcoming, it sounds like SUVA is a place where the complexity of teaching and teaching each student as an individual and providing what he or she needs at a particular moment in time is recognized, right? The complexity of being able to do that well and effectively is really understood. And therefore, you're not going to be successful with every student all of the time, right? That's a really high bar. And so it allows for an openness to talk about the pieces that aren't working as well as you would like. And I think, that's a really important part of, you have to learn, you have to be vulnerable to be able to learn, right? And that's what we have to create in the classroom for our kids too. There's certainly a lot of research that suggests that when adults are able to be vulnerable and learn with one another, then that creates that atmosphere in the classroom for kids. Larry, you look like you're getting ready to say something.
So I was just going to add that I think going with that notion of vulnerability is that we were in wildly different places in terms of, people who know how to set up Zoom meetings, Google meetings, and all these types of things, to people who were, quite frankly, really intimidated by that process. And so putting that on the table, and there was a level of trust among us that people would know that if I come and say, I actually don't know how to do a Google Meet, who can help me with that? Whether it's a teacher, whether it's me, whoever it is, was really important. And I think the pandemic everybody has different levels of expertise, and I think the pandemic in many ways was a huge equalizer. That people, sorry, things are appearing on my things, that it was a huge equalizer where everybody was vulnerable, nobody was a super expert in anything. And we're all putting that on the table, that we're not all super experts in anything, and we're learning how to do this. The first Google Meet that I planned was the first Google Meet that we did. It was that simple, that we just started, we're all going to learn on this together. And I would say, you know what, for me, I would say, I don't know, I'm going to try this right now, see if it works. Oops, it didn't work. And I think that idea that we were all experimenting and we're all trying is really important.
Yeah. So speaking of trying and experimenting, one person who's listening to you all is hoping that we were going to talk a little bit about how to foster or guide or support authentic collaboration among students in this time of distance learning. That wasn't something that we had planned to talk about, but I think it's a really good question and follows from, supporting authentic collaboration among adults. How did it happen for students last spring, or how are you planning for some sort of collaboration with the students, among the students in your classroom this year? Does anyone have a thought to how to speak to that? Or what would be important to keep in mind to support collaboration among students when learning at a distance?
So go ahead.
Okay. So I think it wasn't as difficult, in the spring, and I think that's because we were able to create those relationships and that community in the classroom. So we would work together using Google Slides or Google Docs, or even like different ways to collaborate, even just through the Google Meet. I don't know how that's going to look in the fall. I'm going to be working on building that community from the start, but it is going to be a little bit different just because everybody's going in there, not knowing the students, not knowing each other. I'm getting sixth graders who are coming from 2 or 3 different schools, so many of them don't know each other as well. So, I can anticipate a little bit of, obstacles that we'll have to overcome. But I think just using the platforms that do allow for collaboration is going to be useful.
So I am planning to even though I never did this during the spring, in a virtual setting with Google Meets, I didn't have a chance to have the kids collaborate, even though in a science classroom, that's basically what you do. So this year, with incoming 8th graders, my thought is to really take advantage of the breakout rooms in Zoom, with possible, reservations with the fact that I have to have some kind of person who's going to be monitoring, at least at the very beginning, to set expectations. So I have already talked to our TOSA, and I've asked her to kind of join at times, and I'm planning on maybe asking Larry if he's available. Anybody or counselors who are able to say, I'm planning on having, small groups this time. Can you just you don't have to do anything except just kind of be there so the kids know that you're there, at least so that they know that there's somebody who's going to be kind of monitoring and keeping track of the conversation. And once these rules and expectations are established, then I can start to slowly release them. That's my plan. I will let you know how that works. It works with my college kids. I don't know how it's going to work with 8th graders, but I will come back and update you on that.
That's great.
So I anticipate that that's going to be happening a lot, actually, that we're going to be having small group instruction. I've heard it from a few teachers, and all I can say is that I have a feeling that part of what's going to happen is that we're going to put it on our PDSA cycle and experiment with it and see what were some of the obstacles, what were some of the successes, what were some of the difficulties, and work it out. Because I'm a big fan of, heterogeneous small group instruction as it is. And if we believe, there are things that if we believe that collaboration helps us learn, I think a lot of our teachers really believe that collaboration helps students learn. So I think
intuitively, I think we're going to be doing that, and we're just going to figure out ways to support one another so that it's effective.
Yeah. So there's a series of, there's a few other questions in the chat, so let me just sort of toss them your way and see. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, someone was wondering if you had to temper or manage parent expectations around the learning last spring, in that this was something new and you weren't expert at it. And so wondering, you know, did you have experiences with parents being unhappy, or how did you communicate to parents? And what I would add to that question, so that it's not just focused on last spring when we were figuring everything out while the, you know, things were running, related, what, if anything, are you planning to do as a school or as individual teachers to communicate and set expectations with parents about the learning for this coming year?
I can begin to answer that question. I think one of the reasons why we were successful in the spring was that many of the things that we implemented, students were already experiencing prior to the suspension of face-to-face instruction. So if students were reading articles on Newsela, annotating those articles, writing a summary related to their analysis of a central idea and supporting details, etc., that they were continuing that kind of learning while they were at home. And so for parents, I think we didn't meet face to face, but the expectation was very similar based on what the students had access to. So for me, as a language arts teacher, we were reading a read aloud, The Giver. So students had a copy of the book, and so I would read the book once a week, and then we would again take notes, answer questions. And so the expectations were very similar. And so parents, I think, perhaps didn't see that much of a difference in terms of the way we structured our classes beforehand.
It's nice. Javier, just that story that you told about the students reading text and annotating it and thinking analytically about a piece of writing, it strikes me as such a powerful invitation for middle schoolers to be asked to do a little, to show to their parents what it is that they've been doing, and to like have some kind of an exchange about it, and then bring that back to class and report in, that they can be the messengers for the parents about this really rich learning that's going on that might sort of help quell some anxiety. I don't know.
Definitely. And the other aspect of it is also a student could say, you know, I completed the assignment, I went and I read the article and I annotated the article, and then the parent will send you an email and say, oh, I noticed that my son or daughter didn't complete the assignment. They told me they did complete the assignment, and I could take a screenshot of the text and then send it back to them and say, actually, they haven't completed the assignment yet, so therefore, you know, work on them finishing the assignment. So there's the other side of it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, now that Javier brought up the emails, there's a lot of emailing going back and forth. I mean, there was mass emails that would go on from my end, you know, to my students and to their parents as well. And many times I would have, you know, back and forth conversations with parents about, you know, my son or daughter said that they did this, and I'm like, well, this is what they did. And so it was kind of like, okay, so how do we work so that they actually get the work done? I also use the Remind tool, Remind app with my students, and my parents are also welcome to join. And so that was another method. So there was communication in that, but again, just like Javier said, it was a continuation, the consistency that we had from before. Like in my case, we use lab books in class, and so I turned it into a digital lab book that they had to use, which followed the same format. And so that gave the kids that sense of, you know, okay, familiarity and consistency, because this is the way that things are done in the classroom, and the expectations are the same. So that, you know, added to, you know, the continued expectation. Now, as to the upcoming year, still working on, you know, the syllabus and sending that out to our, you know, our parents, and making sure that they are informed just like they would at the beginning of a regular school year of what the expectations are. Now on a virtual sense, just, that is just a follow-up to how things have been done before.
Yeah, another thing that I'm looking into for just communication with parents is I know there's some sort of tool on Google Classroom to invite the guardians just so that they get just an overview of what assignments are coming up or what's missing, so that way they're aware of what's happening. And then I do want to set up like Google Forms if they have concerns or questions that they can just submit, and I can respond to them that way as well.
Nice.
Yeah. All I'll add is we've already done a parent orientation, a Zoom parent orientation, and I expect that we're gonna continue doing it. We're also gonna create Google Classrooms, so for parents specifically, to answer questions. We didn't get at an administration level, just to address the other part of the question, the idea that we weren't experts or anything like that. We didn't get any questions or concerns about anything like that. So I think we're fortunate that I think our community trusts us, and they know that we're going above and beyond, and we did go above and beyond. So I think that was part of it. As we always said, nothing was perfect, but we're always doing our best, right?
Larry, we should have started with this, but someone was asking about just what is the community, like what are the demographics of the students and where you're located and the folks that you serve. So maybe could you just give a little descriptive overview of your population, and then I cut Javier off, so then he can go after.
Javier, you want to go? I'll go after Javier. Go ahead.
So the only thing I was going to add to this conversation around the parents was also, I think, a sense of understanding what the students were going through. And so the fact that over a weekend, students were not taking one class online, but they were taking 6 classes online. And so for us as educators to be aware of the challenges of that, and being, just aware and willing to understand. And so if a student who's been focused and doing their best and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed, parents were really looking for a reassurance from us that we understood that and that we were okay with that, and that we were willing to help and support students as much as we could, considering the changes that we were going through. So that's the only thing that I thought was important, that we showed empathy towards our students as we made this major change in terms of teaching and learning.
So the demographics of our school are we're about 99.7% Latino. We're a Title I school, 85% low socioeconomic. We are basically East LA. We're in the city of Bell Gardens, but essentially we're on the eastern part of Los Angeles. If you know LA, we're right next to the 710 corridor. It's a working class neighborhood. Mainly immigrant neighborhood, very wonderful, hardworking families who have a very strong bond with each other and with the school. I feel very welcome, I think.
Thanks, Larry. So maybe one last question. Someone was asking if your students bought into the remote classes, or to what extent did you all struggle with student engagement, and then how did you sort of work on that problem? I think that was a typical problem in all kinds of communities. I know I had a son who was fairly truant from high school once we went online, and I couldn't really do much about it. So.
Yeah, that was pretty much the norm. And I think along the lines of, collaboration within our, content specific groups, we also would reach across content areas and collaborate with each other because we share students. So if I had a student who was struggling in my class, I would reach out to the math teacher and say, hey, how is this student doing with you? Is he doing work? Is he turning in work? And she'd be like, yes, they're doing work, but I'm going to talk to their parents this other time. I will let them know that they're not doing so well in your class. And so we would help each other out. And so that was part of what we did. I did a lot of phone calls to parents, talk to parents. And a lot of parents wanted to hear that, they I guess also the familiarity of just hearing that other voice that they know. And many of them were struggling with their kids not wanting to do online learning because the kids were, a lot of them thrive in the social interaction that goes on in school. And suddenly this was taken away from them. And so the depression set in. And so I had to reach out to a couple of my students and tell them, absolutely agree with what you're going through. I mean, it's legitimate. We're all struggling with this. It's, it's something that we've never gone through before. And so just, recognizing that we were struggling together kind of helped. At some point, I think we kind of had to accept that there were certain things that were outside of our control. If our students didn't have access to devices or Wi-Fi for whatever reason, as much as we could reach out, they weren't going to get the work done. And if their other needs were not being met, maybe there was, COVID in the family, or, parents had lost their job. I mean, school became kind of like not really a priority. So again, being cognizant of the fact that there were many other struggles going on at home.
Yeah.
So one of the data sources, one of the things we were constantly checking was what was the level of engagement. And one of the things that teachers were talking about is that a lot of students see this as a buffet of education. So they were trying this piece and then they would not do that piece. But I think our level of engagement across the board was pretty high. So consistently, meaning every week doing some level of work, we had 60 to 70% of students doing work, but we had much higher levels, because I've seen that at other places, like only 60% ever did any kind of showing up. We were very consistent at 60 to 70, and almost all of our students did some level of work, right? And we were constantly, not as a metric, kind of like what I was saying, like what is a quantitative, how many did we do? It was just like, well, how many students participate in this? Okay, what can we do to support that? What can we do that as admin to support it? And we're constantly looking at how to get our students, because one of our other concerns is, if they weren't there, we really were concerned about what was going on in their lives. So how can we reach out? So we reached out to neighbors and said, have you seen them? Have you heard from them? And trying different ways to reach out, because at the end of the day, that was one of my biggest concern is, how are you doing? Are you getting food? Let's make sure that those needs are taken care of. So we're also reaching out in that manner.
Yeah, so just providing a level of care and social and emotional support to the children and to the families, right? In the same way that you all were providing that to each other through your weekly meetings, it sounds like, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, when does school start for you all at SUVA, and will you be fully at a distance, or what's the plan?
Well, we get our kids on Monday of next week, right? And we are fully distant learning. Our first 2 days of training, professional development, is this upcoming Thursday and Friday. And we start with Monday, the 17th, and we're still getting ready for it. So that's where we're going.
I bet. I think people are just feeling really appreciative for listening in to the conversation, and I'm just scanning to see if I missed any questions. But I think there was just one question from someone who was wondering and hoping to learn how to use the Google to be able to invite parents. And I don't know, Michelle, if you have more information to offer about that, or if maybe that's something that we can share with people afterwards. Or maybe Larry, you do.
Yeah, I've never used it. I just know there is an invite guardians. I don't know if I'm sure on my part I have to get the emails from the parents somehow, but I know once you get them, it lets them know, it gives them summaries of their students' work. So I'm going to try that this year and see how it goes.
Sounds good. All right, Norma, did you want to have folks do something else?
Yes.
Before Norma does that, I just want to thank the panelists so much for taking their time a couple of days before school starts to share with folks what your experience was last spring and how you're carrying it into the new year.
Yes, thank you, everybody. This was such a great session. I think that it's so valuable to sort of think about not just the students, but the teachers and how to support each other through this, because we are human beings as well. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly and just go through a few slides that I need to discuss a little bit, just to let everybody know that we have 2 more days of webinars remaining for this week. We will start our next launch in September, but we have great sessions around English language development and students with special needs and homeless students. Tomorrow is a great session for elementary grade levels from Erfran Tovar, and then for secondary for supporting distance language learning. So we want to thank you again. Our presenters are fantastic. If you could please do us the honor of, underneath the tile where you logged in for this session, for this webinar, there's a small box that says session feedback. Please provide us your feedback. And also, if you are interested in a certification of completion, you simply click on that as well underneath the webinar, and you fill out a form, and you will be able to obtain the process for a certificate of completion. So I will stop sharing my screen and thank everybody again. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful school year, and I'm very confident that since you have this structure in place, at least you'll have each other to support you through this, and your students are very lucky to have you. So we want to say thank you from CTA and Stanford and Suva Middle School, and we hope you have a wonderful day and week.